In the heart of West Africa lies a land shaped by rivers, forests and savannas. It was here, along the great Niger River, that the story of Mali would unfold. The Niger was more than a body of water. It was a lifeline, curving like a crescent, across the landscape providing fertile soil, fish and an artery for travel and trade. In the surrounding savannas, farmers grew millet and sorghum, while herders raised cattle and goats. To the south, dense forests offered timber, cola nuts, and hunting grounds. To the north stretched the Sahara, a desert that appeared lifeless at first glance, but was crossed by ancient caravan routes linking Africa to the wider world. Beneath this land, hidden in river valleys and rocky hills, glittered the resources that would make Mali famous: veins of gold and deposits of salt. Before Mali rose, another kingdom had already dominated this region. This was the Ghana Empire, also called Ouagadougou by its people. From around the 6th to the 11th century, Ghana controlled the flow of gold and salt across the Sahara. Its kings grew rich by taxing merchants and guarding trade routes. At its height, Ghana dazzled travelers with wealth and power. But like many empires, Ghana faced challenges. Pressure from nomadic raiders, shifts in trade, and internal conflicts weakened it. By the late 12th century, the once mighty Ghana Empire had splintered, leaving smaller kingdoms and clans to compete for influence. Among these peoples were the Mandinka, sometimes called the Mande. They were spread across a wide region, organized in clans with their own chiefs and traditions. The Mandinka were farmers, hunters and traders, skilled at navigating both the fertile valleys and the dry plains. They also preserved a rich oral tradition where griots or storytellers kept alive the memories of their ancestors. These griots were the guardians of history, passing down epic tales of bravery, wisdom and leadership. One of their most enduring stories would be the tale of a boy named Sundiata. The story of Sundiata Keita begins not as a tale of triumph, but as a story of hardship. According to tradition, he was born into the Keita clan, destined to inherit leadership, but his childhood was marked by struggle. He was unable to walk for many years, mocked by rivals and doubted even by his own people. Yet his mother, Sogolon, remained devoted, believing her son carried a great destiny. The griots tell how Sundiata, with determination and the aid of his family, eventually rose to his feet. This moment, more than a personal victory, became a symbol for the Mandinka people, a leader who overcame weakness to rise in strength. Sundiata's early years were spent in a world of political turmoil. Rival clans competed for dominance, and local kings sought to fill the power vacuum left by Ghana's decline. One of the most powerful rulers was the sorcerer king Soumaoro Kante of the Soso. Soumaoro expanded his control over much of the region, demanding tribute and ruling with fear. For the Mandinka, his rise threatened their independence and their way of life. Sundiata would eventually emerge as the leader who could unite his people against Soumaoro. The griots describe how Sundiata forged alliances among rival clans, bringing together hunters, warriors and chiefs who had once been divided. He built unity where there had been discord, weaving together the strength of many into a single force. This was not merely military strategy, but cultural and political vision. Sundiata understood that to survive, the Mandinka needed to act as one. The decisive confrontation came in 1235 at the Battle of Kirina. The armies of Sundiata and Soumaoro met on the plains. The battle has been preserved both in legend and history. In the epic, Sundiata is portrayed as a heroic figure who overcame Soumaoro's magic through his own courage and the loyalty of his allies. Whatever the details, the result was clear. Soumaoro's power was broken, and the Mandinka emerged victorious. From this moment, the foundations of the Mali Empire were laid. Sundiata became the ruler, taking the title of Mansa, meaning king. His authority was not built on fear alone, but on respect and alliance. he brought together diverse clans under a shared system, recognizing their traditions while uniting them under his leadership. The empire he built was not just a political state, but a cultural community rooted in shared memory, law, and custom. One of Sundiata's great achievements was establishing a code of law and governance that bound the different peoples of Mali together. Oral tradition speaks of the Kurukan Fuga, a kind of constitution created after the victory at Kirina. This charter emphasized justice, the rights of clans, the protection of the weak, and respect for the environment. While historians debate its precise form, the idea reflects the vision of Sundiata as a lawgiver as well as a conqueror. Under Sundiata, Mali's capital was established at Niani, a city along the upper Niger. From here, trade routes radiated outward, linking Mali to the wider world. Farmers provided grain for the population, hunters supplied meat and hides, and traders carried goods across the savannah. Gold, the most precious resource, began to flow in greater abundance. The empire's position between the desert and the forests gave it access to both northern and southern trade. Yet Sundiata's legacy was more than material. He also shaped the cultural identity of Mali. The griots celebrated him in the Epic of Sundiata, a tale that continues to be performed in West Africa today. In this epic, he is not only a king, but a symbol of unity, wisdom, and perseverance. His struggles, victories, and laws became the foundation for generations who looked back to him as the founder of their civilization. By the time of his death, Mali was no longer a loose collection of clans, but a rising empire with strength, wealth, and order. The Mandinka had moved from being one people among many to the center of a kingdom that would soon become known across Africa and beyond. Sundiata's work had set the stage for the golden age of Mali, where trade, culture, and learning would flourish under his successors. The dawn of Mali's empire was therefore both a story of geography and of people, of rivers and savannas, of gold and salt, but most of all, of a leader who turned weakness into strength. Sundiata Keita had shown that unity could overcome division, and his vision created the foundations of one of the greatest empires in African history. When Sundiata Keita passed from the world, he left behind more than a memory. He had built the foundations of a state that could last, a network of alliances and a framework of law that bound together peoples across the savannah and along the Niger River. Yet no empire survives on the vision of one leader alone. To endure, it needs rulers who can strengthen what has been planted, expand its reach, and defend it against rivals. The story of Mali after Sundiata is one of kings who built upon his legacy, transforming a new kingdom into a great power. The successors of Sundiata came from the Keita dynasty. His sons and grandsons inherited the title of Mansa, and with it the responsibility of holding together a diverse and growing realm. At first, these early rulers faced the challenge of consolidating power. The clans that had joined Sundiata in his great struggle remained proud and independent, and the loyalty of chiefs was never something that could be taken for granted. To preserve unity, the Keita rulers relied on both diplomacy and strength. They granted autonomy in local matters, but demanded tribute and loyalty to the throne. The griots tell of councils where kings met with clan leaders, negotiating agreements that allowed the empire to endure without breaking apart. As the decades passed, Mali expanded beyond the core lands of the Mandinka. The empire began to stretch across the savannah, seizing key trade centers and controlling strategic regions that linked the desert to the forest. The Niger River served as a great highway, and along its banks grew cities that would later become famous. Each new territory added not only land but also resources, manpower, and wealth. By bringing these regions under Mali's influence, the kings ensured that gold from the mines, salt from the desert, and grain from fertile fields all flowed into the empire's markets. Expansion was not achieved by force alone. It required vision, organization, and the ability to weave many peoples into a single fabric. Here, the griots played a vital role. These oral historians carried the memory of the past, telling the story of Sundiata and his successors, reminding subjects that Mali was not simply a political arrangement, but a shared destiny. At courts and in villages, the griots sang of battles, kings, and laws. Their words bound people together, for memory itself became a weapon as powerful as the spear. To forget was to lose identity, but to remember was to belong to something greater. Thus, through their voices, Mali's rulers strengthened the unity of the empire. The strength of Mali also rested on its armies. The Mansas maintained forces that could defend trade routes, suppress rebellion, and project power across vast distances. Warriors from across the empire served under banners of loyalty to the Keita dynasty. Horses, rare and valuable in the region, gave cavalry units a decisive edge in battle. The armies of Mali patrolled the caravan roads that wound northward into the Sahara, protecting merchants from raiders and ensuring that the empire benefited from the trade passing through its lands. In this way, Mali became not only a political power but also a guardian of commerce. Trade was the lifeblood of the empire. By the 13th and 14th centuries, Mali was firmly connected to the networks that stretched across the Sahara. Merchants carried salt from the great mines of Tagaza, slabs so precious that caravans of camels transported them hundreds of miles across the desert. In return, gold from Mali's lands was exchanged for cloth, beads, and horses. The arrival of Berber and Arab merchants brought new goods, new technologies, and new ideas. These traders introduced fine textiles, metalwork, and most importantly, the growing influence of Islam. Towns along the desert edge became bustling markets where cultures met, and Mali prospered as the crossroads of West Africa. For the Mansas, contact with Berber and Arab merchants meant more than material gain. It also meant recognition. Mali began to appear in the writings of North African scholars and geographers, described as a land of immense wealth and powerful rulers. Stories of Mali's gold reached as far as Europe, inspiring maps that placed the empire at the center of Africa. This recognition elevated the authority of the Mansas, for to be known abroad was to be acknowledged as a true empire of significance. The growth of Mali also required strong systems of governance. The empire was vast, stretching across forests, savannas, and desert edge. A single ruler could not personally govern every village and town. Instead, the Mansas relied on a system of provinces, each overseen by governors or local chiefs loyal to the throne. Tribute flowed to the capital in Niani, where it was distributed to maintain the court, fund the armies, and support the expansion of trade. Justice was administered through both customary law and the authority of the king, ensuring that disputes were settled and order maintained. Administration was not merely about control, it was also about balance. The Mansas had to ensure that no clan or province grew too powerful, for unity could easily fracture into rivalry. To manage this, rulers often appointed family members or trusted allies to key positions, while also allowing traditional leaders to maintain local authority. This balance of central strength and local autonomy became a defining feature of Mali's stability. Over time, Mali's expansion brought it control of some of the most important cities of West Africa. Places like Timbuktu and Gao came under the shadow of its authority, growing into centers of trade and learning. Each conquest added not only wealth, but also prestige, for the empire was no longer a loose collection of clans, but a kingdom of cities, markets, and caravan routes. The reach of the Mansas extended across the region, touching lands far beyond the Mandinka heartland. Yet what held all this together was not only armies and wealth, but also the idea of empire itself. The griots reminded the people of Sundiata's vision, of the laws and traditions that bound the clans, and of the destiny of the Keita dynasty to rule. As long as the memory of the founder remained alive, the successors could draw upon that legacy to strengthen their authority. History became a tool of governance, and the past was always present in the songs of the griots. By the end of this period, Mali was no longer a fragile kingdom struggling to survive. It had become a formidable empire with a system of governance, a powerful military, control of trade, and recognition from distant lands. The rise of the great kings after Sundiata marked the transformation of Mali into a true power, one that would soon reach its golden age under the most famous ruler of all, Mansa Musa. As Mali expanded across the savannas of West Africa, it became more than a political empire. It became the beating heart of a global network of trade, drawing merchants and travelers from across the Sahara and beyond. At its core lay the riches of the land itself. Gold glimmered beneath the soil, while salt, though far humbler in appearance, was just as valuable. Together, these resources elevated Mali into a realm of extraordinary wealth, linking it to the wider medieval world. Mali's position was one of geography as well as power. The empire stretched across the fertile valleys of the Niger River, reaching northward to touch the edges of the Sahara Desert and southward to the forest zones. This gave the empire access to every type of trade route: desert caravans, river transport, and overland paths through the grasslands. Merchants traveling from Morocco, Algeria, or Egypt looked south across the desert for gold, while those within Mali looked north for salt and foreign luxuries. The Mansas and their officials recognized that the empire's strength rested on controlling this flow. By securing trade routes, taxing goods, and maintaining order, Mali positioned itself as the central link between Africa's interior and the Mediterranean world. Among the treasures of Mali, gold was the most celebrated. The empire's wealth came in large part from two legendary mining regions, Bambouk and Bure. Located along the upper reaches of the Niger and Senegal rivers, these mines produced gold that was famed for its purity. Small flakes and nuggets were collected from riverbeds, while miners dug into the earth to extract more. The gold was then weighed, traded, and carried northward by merchants. For centuries, West Africa supplied much of the gold that fueled economies in North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. When medieval maps were drawn, Mali appeared not as an empty land, but as a place of golden abundance. Yet if gold was wealth, salt was survival. The lands of Mali were rich in many things, but not in salt. Without it, food could not be preserved, and human health would fail. From the barren desert came this vital resource, cut into great slabs from mines at places such as Tagaza. Caravans of camels transported these slabs across hundreds of miles of sand, bringing them into Mali, where they were traded for gold, grain, and other goods. To the people of the empire, salt was truly white gold, as precious as the metal that glittered in their rivers. The balance between gold and salt defined the rhythm of trade, each resource flowing in opposite directions across the desert. The caravans that carried these goods were wonders in themselves. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of camels moved in long lines across the desert sands, each animal laden with sacks of salt, cloth, or dates. Merchants traveled in groups for safety, guided by skilled desert navigators who knew the stars, the dunes, and the rare wells that offered life in the barren wilderness. At night, the caravans halted to rest, and fires glowed under the desert sky. Songs, prayers, and bargaining filled the air. These journeys could last weeks or even months, connecting the towns of North Africa with the bustling markets of Mali. The cities of Mali grew into centers of commerce that amazed travelers. Timbuktu, which began as a seasonal camp for nomads, blossomed into one of the great markets of the empire. Traders gathered there with goods from across Africa and beyond. Grain from the savannah, ivory from the forests, gold from Bambouk, and salt from Tagaza all passed through its markets. Timbuktu's position near the Niger River made it a crossroads for both river and desert trade, and under Mali's rule, it became known not only for wealth, but also for culture and learning. Gao, further to the east, also rose as a hub of exchange, drawing merchants eager to tap into Mali's resources. These cities pulsed with life, where languages mixed, goods exchanged hands, and news from distant lands spread quickly. Compared to other great powers of the medieval world, Mali's economy was extraordinary. While kingdoms in Europe struggled with limited resources, and while many states in Asia relied on complex taxation, Mali stood on a foundation of natural abundance. Gold from its mines flowed into the treasuries of Mediterranean cities, shaping the economies of entire regions. Chronicles written by Arab scholars described Mali as a land of almost unimaginable wealth, where kings commanded stores of gold so vast that they dazzled all who heard of them. In terms of economic importance, Mali was as vital to the medieval world as Venice or Constantinople, its riches fueling networks that spanned continents. Trade in Mali was not only about goods, but also about culture. With the merchants came new ideas, beliefs and practices. Islam spread more deeply into the empire through the contacts of trade. Muslim merchants from North Africa brought with them not only their goods, but also their faith, their customs, and their learning. Mosques began to appear in cities, and local rulers adopted Islamic titles and practices, blending them with existing traditions. At the same time, Mali's own culture flowed outward. Music, stories, and oral traditions influenced travelers who carried tales of Mali's greatness to far-off lands. This cultural blending gave Mali a unique identity. It was at once deeply African, rooted in the traditions of the Mandinka and their griots, and yet connected to the wider Islamic world. In Timbuktu, one might hear the prayers of Muslim scholars, the bargaining of Berber merchants, and the songs of local griots all in the same day. Farmers and herders brought their produce into the cities, while caravans carried the wealth of Mali to the shores of the Mediterranean. The empire thrived not only because of its resources, but because of its openness to exchange. The wealth of Mali impressed even the most distant observers. European maps of the 14th century sometimes depicted a king of Mali holding a golden nugget, a symbol of the land's riches. Arab geographers wrote with wonder about the abundance of gold and the order of the markets. For people who lived far away, Mali became a place of legend, a land where kings could scatter gold in the streets and where prosperity seemed endless. By controlling gold, salt, and trade, Mali became one of the wealthiest and most connected states of the medieval world. Its cities stood as bridges between the desert and the river, its caravans carried riches across the Sahara, and its people shaped a culture that blended local traditions with global influences. Wealth in Mali was never just about material gain. It was about power, identity, and the place of the empire in the wider story of humanity. In this golden age of trade, Mali stood as the wealth of the world, a kingdom whose resources sustained far more than its own people, reaching across deserts, seas, and continents. Among all the rulers of Mali, one name shines brighter than the rest. That name is Mansa Musa, remembered not only in Africa, but across the medieval world. To his subjects, he was a king of prosperity and justice. To foreign merchants and scholars, he was a monarch of almost unimaginable wealth. To later generations, he became a legend, a figure who seemed larger than life, embodying the greatness of Mali at its height. His reign marked the golden age of the empire, and his famous pilgrimage to Mecca turned him into one of the most celebrated rulers of his time. Mansa Musa came to the throne in the early 14th century. He was part of the Keita dynasty, descended from Sundiata, and inherited a kingdom already strong from the efforts of earlier kings. His accession was said to have taken place while his predecessor undertook an ambitious expedition westward into the Atlantic Ocean. When that ruler did not return, Musa was chosen to take up the crown. From the moment he became Mansa, he showed himself to be a leader of both vision and determination. Under Mansa Musa, Mali entered its golden age. The empire stretched across much of West Africa, from the Atlantic coast to the heart of the Sahara. It controlled the richest gold mines of the region and commanded the great caravan routes. Farmers cultivated the fertile valleys, merchants thrived in the cities, and scholars gathered in growing centers of learning. The empire was stable, prosperous, and respected, and the name of Mali carried weight far beyond its borders. Yet it was the pilgrimage of Mansa Musa that made his fame eternal. In 1324, he set out to perform the Hajj, the sacred journey to Mecca required of all Muslims who had the means to undertake it. For Mansa Musa, the Hajj was more than a religious duty. It was a chance to display the wealth and power of Mali to the wider Islamic world. The scale of his preparations reflected the grandeur of his reign. He gathered an enormous entourage, numbering in the tens of thousands. Soldiers, officials, servants, and merchants accompanied him. Camels and horses carried supplies across the desert, while others were laden with gold. As the caravan moved northward across the Sahara, its size and richness astonished all who saw it. When Mansa Musa reached Cairo in Egypt, he caused a sensation that would be remembered for centuries. He distributed gifts of gold so freely that the value of the metal is said to have fallen throughout the region. Merchants, scholars, and rulers alike marveled at his generosity, while the sheer scale of his retinue dazzled the city. Streets were filled with his people, markets overflowed with trade, and the wealth of Mali seemed without limit. From Cairo, Mansa Musa continued on to Mecca, fulfilling his religious obligation with devotion. But everywhere he traveled, he left behind impressions of grandeur and magnificence. The pilgrimage was not only an act of faith, but also a declaration that Mali was one of the great powers of the world. News of his journey spread widely, carried by merchants and chroniclers. Mali entered the imagination of the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern world as a land of gold and a kingdom of power. The impact of this pilgrimage went far beyond the moment itself. In the decades that followed, Mali appeared in the writings of Arab historians and geographers. Maps created in Europe began to depict the empire, often showing a king holding a golden nugget as a symbol of wealth. Stories of Mansa Musa's generosity and riches traveled across continents, shaping the reputation of Mali for centuries. It was through this pilgrimage that Mali truly entered global history. No longer a distant land, but a recognized force in the medieval world. Mansa Musa did not return from his journey empty-handed. Along with the fame and prestige it brought, he also gathered knowledge, contacts, and inspiration. He brought back architects, scholars, and craftsmen, determined to enrich his empire not only with wealth, but with culture and learning. He invested heavily in the development of cities, particularly Timbuktu and Gao, transforming them into centers of architecture, education, and faith. In Timbuktu, Mansa Musa oversaw the construction of mosques that would become symbols of West African Islam. The most famous was the Niger River Mosque, built with the guidance of an Andalusian architect brought from North Africa. Its adobe walls and wooden beams stood as a monument to the blending of local materials with international styles. In Gao and other cities, he commissioned buildings that reflected both the grandeur of Mali and the influence of the wider Islamic world. These structures were not only places of worship, but also centers of community life and learning. Mansa Musa also supported the establishment of libraries and schools. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu grew under his patronage, attracting scholars from across Africa and the Middle East. Manuscripts were collected, copied and studied, covering subjects such as law, theology, mathematics and astronomy. Students from Mali and beyond flocked to these institutions, making Timbuktu one of the intellectual capitals of the medieval world. Through this investment in learning, Mansa Musa ensured that Mali's wealth was not limited to gold and salt, but extended to knowledge and culture as well. The generosity and vision of Mansa Musa extended to his people. By supporting trade, he enriched merchants and farmers. By building mosques, he strengthened faith and community. By fostering education, he left a legacy of scholarship that would endure long after his reign. His rule was not without challenges, for governing such a vast empire required constant vigilance, but his ability to maintain prosperity and stability made him one of the greatest rulers of his age. By the time Mansa Musa's reign came to an end, Mali was at the height of its glory. Its borders stretched wide, its cities thrived, its scholars studied, and its merchants traded across deserts and seas. The pilgrimage of 1324 to 1325 had brought Mali international recognition, but it was his investments at home that secured the empire's golden age. He had transformed Mali into a land that was not only wealthy, but also cultured, respected, and enduring. In the centuries since, Mansa Musa has often been remembered as the richest man who ever lived. Yet his true legacy was greater than his wealth. He showed how prosperity could be used to strengthen faith, culture, and learning. His journey to Mecca was a moment of spectacle, but his reign at home was a time of building. Through his vision, Mali reached a peak of influence and prestige that few empires could match. The story of Mansa Musa is therefore the story of Mali at its zenith, a kingdom of gold and knowledge, faith and power, remembered across continents and centuries. His name remains a symbol of the greatness of Africa's golden kingdom, the ruler who carried the wealth of his empire across the desert and left the world in awe. At the height of the Mali Empire, wealth and power were only part of the story. Just as important was the blossoming of faith, knowledge, and culture. Gold and salt may have drawn merchants across deserts, but it was the reputation of Mali's cities, especially Timbuktu, that captured the imagination of scholars and travelers. Within these cities, a unique blend of traditions took root, where Islam thrived alongside older beliefs, and where learning flourished in schools, libraries, and mosques. Mali was not only an empire of riches, but also an empire of the mind. Islam had entered West Africa long before Mali's rise, carried by Berber and Arab merchants who crossed the Sahara. Through trade, ideas flowed as surely as goods. The faith spread gradually, taking hold first among merchants and rulers, who saw in Islam not only a spiritual guide, but also a bridge to wider networks of commerce and diplomacy. Under rulers like Mansa Musa, Islam gained official support. Mosques were built, scholars were invited, and Islamic law influenced governance. Yet the spread of Islam did not erase older traditions. Among the Mandinka and other peoples of Mali, ancestral spirits, local rituals, and oral customs continued to thrive. The empire became a place where faiths coexisted, where the call to prayer sounded in the cities, while villages carried on rituals tied to the land and community. This coexistence gave Mali a cultural richness that was uniquely its own. Of all the cities in the empire, none became as famous as Timbuktu. What began as a settlement of Tuareg herders grew into one of the most celebrated centers of learning. In the medieval world, Timbuktu thrived because of its position on the edge of the Sahara and along the Niger River. Caravans from the north brought goods and books, while traders from the south carried gold, grain, and ivory. With wealth came scholars, and with scholars came renown. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Timbuktu was described as a city filled with learned men, a place where the written word was as prized as gold. At the heart of Timbuktu's scholarly life was the University of Sankore. Unlike modern universities, Sankore was not a single building, but a network of schools connected to mosques and private homes. The Mosque of Sankore, with its iconic adobe walls and wooden beams, served as a central institution. Students gathered there to study under masters who were respected for their knowledge and piety. Subjects ranged widely, from Islamic law and theology to mathematics, astronomy, grammar, and medicine. Teaching was conducted orally, but manuscripts were also central, copied by scribes and collected by scholars. The life of a student in Timbuktu was demanding but prestigious. Many began with the memorization of the Quran, progressing through stages of learning until they could debate law and philosophy with confidence. Manuscripts, often written in Arabic, were treasures of the city. They were copied with great care, bound in leather, and passed from hand to hand. Scribes played a vital role in preserving knowledge, ensuring that texts on theology, science, and literature were available to future generations. A wealthy family might own a personal library, while larger collections were housed in mosques or with renowned scholars. Over time, Timbuktu became home to tens of thousands of manuscripts, making it one of the great centers of written knowledge in Africa. The scholars of Timbuktu were not isolated from the wider world. They corresponded with learned men in North Africa and the Middle East, and some traveled to places like Cairo and Fez to deepen their studies. In return, they welcomed foreign students to Mali. The result was a city where ideas circulated freely, where debates on law or astronomy might echo in the courtyards of mosques, and where a student from the savannah could sit beside one from across the Sahara. This international exchange gave Timbuktu a cosmopolitan character, placing it firmly within the intellectual networks of the Islamic world. Architecture reflected the flourishing of faith and learning. The mosques of Timbuktu and Gao were built of sun-dried mud, reinforced with wooden beams that jutted from the walls, giving the structures their distinctive look. These buildings required regular maintenance, with communities gathering to replaster walls before the rainy season. Palaces and houses of nobles were often built in similar styles, blending functionality with elegance. Streets and marketplaces grew around these landmarks, forming cities that were both practical centers of trade and symbolic centers of culture. The site of the Niger River Mosque, or the Sankore complex, stood as reminders of the union of wealth, faith, and knowledge that defined the empire. Culture in Mali extended beyond the written word. Poetry and oral traditions flourished, carried by the griots who preserved the memory of the people. Griots recited the epic of Sundiata, reminding audiences of the empire's origins and its values. They sang praises of kings, narrated family, genealogies, and composed verses that blended history with art. In the cities, Arabic poetry was studied and written, while in villages, Mandinka songs and proverbs continued to guide daily life. This blending of written and oral traditions gave Mali a cultural depth that combined the enduring power of memory with the permanence of manuscripts. While scholars debated and scribes copied, everyday life continued in the empire's towns and villages. Farmers formed the backbone of society, cultivating millet, rice, and sorghum in the fertile river valleys. Their labor sustained the growing urban centers, ensuring that cities like Timbuktu had the grain they needed to thrive. Traders moved between markets, selling food, cloth, and animals. Artisans shaped pottery, wove textiles, and crafted jewelry. Nobles and officials managed the administration of provinces, overseeing justice and tribute. Even as Mali became famous for its kings and scholars, it was the steady work of ordinary people that kept the empire alive. religion, learning, and culture intertwined in everyday life. A farmer might attend Friday prayers at the village mosque. A student might recite verses by lamplight, and a griot might sing at a gathering in the evening. The rhythm of life blended devotion with tradition, trade with scholarship, and labor with artistry. This balance gave the empire a vitality that went beyond wealth, rooting it in both the material and the spiritual. By the height of its golden age, Mali was admired not only for its riches, but also for its wisdom. Timbuktu and Gao stood as cities, where knowledge was valued as highly as gold. Mosques rose as symbols of faith, libraries as treasuries of thought, and oral traditions as guides to identity. Islam provided a framework that connected Mali to the wider world, while local customs ensured that the empire retained its unique character. The story of Mali's cities of knowledge and faith is a reminder that empires are not remembered only for their conquests or their wealth. They are remembered for the ideas they foster, the culture they create, and the lives of the people who live within them. In the bustling markets of Timbuktu, in the quiet courtyards of Sankore, and in the songs of the griots, Mali's greatness found its most lasting expression. Every empire, no matter how brilliant its rise or how golden its age, eventually faces decline. For Mali, the centuries after the reign of Mansa Musa brought challenges that slowly chipped away at its strength. What had been a beacon of wealth, knowledge, and stability became vulnerable to internal struggles, external threats, and shifting trade patterns. Yet even as Mali's political power faded, its cultural and historical legacy endured. The decline began after the death of Mansa Musa in 1337. His reign had expanded the empire's fame across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. But following his rule, Mali was left with leaders who often lacked his vision or authority. Some successors were strong, yet many were weak or caught in disputes over succession. In a system where loyalty from provinces depended heavily on the strength of the ruler, instability at the top could unravel the unity of the empire. Rival clans and factions within the royal court began to compete for influence, weakening the central government that had once bound the vast lands together. Internal struggles opened the door to outside threats. Neighboring peoples, long held, backed by Mali's armies, began to test the empire's borders. The Mossi kingdoms from the south raided into Mali's lands, seeking to expand their own influence. In the north, Tuareg groups reasserted control over parts of the Sahara, including Timbuktu at times. These incursions strained Mali's resources, forcing the empire to defend multiple fronts while also grappling with political divisions at home. The greatest challenge came from the east, where the Songhai people were rising in power. Once vassals, under Mali, the Songhai had grown steadily stronger, centered around the city of Gao. By the 15th century, they were able to break away and assert their independence. Under rulers like Sunni Ali and later Askia Muhammad, Songhai expanded rapidly, taking over many of the territories that had once been central to Mali's wealth. Cities like Timbuktu and Gao, which had symbolized Mali's golden age, shifted into Songhai's control. The heart of West African trade now lay under a new empire. This loss of trade dominance was devastating. Mali's strength had always rested on its ability to control the flow of goods across the Sahara. The gold mines of Bambouk and Bure still existed, and salt caravans still moved. But without secure borders and powerful rulers, Mali no longer commanded the trade routes. Merchants began to prefer Songhai cities or bypass Mali altogether. Wealth that once filled the coffers of the Mansas now dwindled. Without the revenue from commerce, the empire's armies weakened, administration faltered, and provincial loyalty grew fragile. As Songhai grew, Mali shrank. By the late 15th century, the empire had lost its position as the leading power of West Africa. What remained of Mali was reduced to a smaller kingdom centered in the Mandinka heartlands. Even there, rival factions contested power, and the once great empire became a shadow of its former self. Yet even in decline, Mali was never erased. Its cultural and spiritual traditions endured, carried by the Mandinka people and preserved through oral memory. Griots continued to sing the epic of Sundiata, reminding audiences of the empire's heroic origins. Families and communities kept alive their ancestral stories, ensuring that the glory of Mali was not forgotten, even when its political power faded. In villages and towns, Islam remained strong, coexisting with older traditions. Mosques built during the height of the empire still stood, maintained by local communities as reminders of a golden past. European explorers and geographers of the 15th and 16th centuries also helped preserve Mali's story. Inspired by tales of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage and Mali's wealth, they placed the empire prominently on maps and in chronicles. Even as Mali weakened, its name continued to evoke images of gold and prosperity. For many outside Africa, Mali became a symbol of a powerful and cultured Black African kingdom, challenging stereotypes and inspiring fascination. The legacy of Mali did not end with its fall. Its successor, the Songhai Empire, built upon many of the foundations Mali had established. Trade routes, systems of administration, and centers of learning continued to flourish under new rulers. Timbuktu remained a hub of scholarship, filled with manuscripts and schools that traced their roots back to Mali's golden age. In this way, Mali's influence extended far beyond the life of the empire itself. In African history, Mali stands as one of the great empires of the continent, alongside Ghana before it and Songhai after it. It represented a peak of wealth and cultural achievement in West Africa, remembered for rulers like Sundiata Keita and Mansa Musa, for cities like Timbuktu, and for the balance of oral tradition with written scholarship. The Mandinka people carried forward this memory, ensuring that the name of Mali lived on in stories, songs, and identity. In world history, Mali's significance is just as profound. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage demonstrated the interconnectedness of medieval Africa with the broader Islamic world. Gold from Mali enriched markets as far as Cairo and Venice, linking West Africa to the economic systems of Europe and the Middle East. Scholars in Timbuktu contributed to global knowledge, preserving texts in science, law, and philosophy that connected Africa to a wider intellectual heritage. Mali was proof that Africa was not isolated, but an integral part of the medieval world. Reflecting on the story of Mali is to reflect on the rise and fall of human achievement. Empires grow from strong leaders, fertile lands, and strategic opportunities, but they also decline when unity falters, when rivals rise, and when fortune shifts. Mali's twilight was gradual, marked by battles, losses, and the rise of Songhai. Yet decline did not erase its greatness. The memory of Mali's golden age continued to shine, inspiring later generations and leaving behind a legacy of wealth, knowledge, and culture. Today, the story of Mali still carries lessons. It reminds us of the importance of leadership and unity, of the value of knowledge alongside material wealth, and of the enduring power of memory. It shows how faith and tradition can coexist, how cities can become centers of wisdom, and how even after political decline, cultural achievements can echo through the ages. As the sun set on the Mali Empire, it did not set on its story. From the banks of the Niger River to the sands of the Sahara, from the songs of the griots to the manuscripts of Timbuktu, Mali's golden age lives on. Its twilight was not an end, but a transformation, leaving behind a heritage that continues. To inspire, the Empire of Mali once the wealth of the world, remains a beacon of human achievement, a reminder that greatness can be measured not only in riches and power, but in knowledge, faith, and culture that endure across time.